They say that when you truly love someone, your brain blinds you to the sharpest knives they hold behind their backs. For 7 years, I was completely blind. But sitting on that cold wooden bench outside courtroom 4B, the blindness didn't just fade, it shattered. The air in the courthouse smelled of old paper, floor wax, and broken promises. Every few minutes, the heavy oak doors would swing open, and a wave of murmurs would escape into the hallway. Across from me sat Clara, my wife. Or rather, the woman who wore my ring while systematically dismantling my life from the inside out. She was wearing a pristine, navy blue tailored suit, bought with my credit card just 3 weeks before she filed for divorce. She was sipping an iced latte, casually chatting with her high-profile attorney, Mr. Vance. She didn't look like a woman fighting a legal battle. She looked like a CEO waiting to sign a contract to take over a failing company. When she finally glanced over at me, she didn't look away. Instead, a slow, mocking smile crept up her face. She raised her cup in a silent, cruel toast. That look told me everything I needed to know. She thought she had won. She thought she was about to walk into that courtroom, present her carefully fabricated mountain of lies, and walk out with my late grandfather's logistics company, our family home, and a monthly alimony check that would keep me in debt for the rest of my natural life. Her lawyer leaned over, whispered something in her ear, and she let out a soft, melodic laugh. It was the same laugh that used to comfort me after a long day at the warehouse. Now it sounded like ice scraping against concrete. She truly believed I was arriving at a gunfight with nothing but a plastic knife. She believed I was broken, penniless, and helpless. What Clara didn't know, what her expensive legal team hadn't even bothered to look into, was that a quiet man is not a weak man. For 6 months, while she was busy planning my financial execution, I was playing a very different game. I wasn't just defending myself, I was building a fortress of absolute truth. And in my pocket, my phone vibrated with a single text message that was about to change the trajectory of both our lives forever. "Mr. Vance? Mr. Miller? The Honorable Judge Catherine Thomas is ready for you," the bailiff announced, his voice echoing down the sterile hallway. Clara stood up smoothly, smoothing down her jacket. As she walked past me toward the heavy double doors, she paused. She leaned in just close enough for me to smell her expensive perfume, the one I gave her for our last anniversary. "It didn't have to be this hard, Arthur," she whispered, her voice dripping with fake pity. "If you had just signed the papers when I asked, you'd at least have your dignity left. Now, you're going to leave this building with nothing but the clothes on your back." I didn't look up at her. I didn't blink. I simply reached into my pocket, touched the cool glass of my phone, and took a deep, steady breath. "We'll see what the judge says, Clara," I replied quietly. She let out a short, dismissive sigh and pushed through the doors. I watched her back as she walked into the light of the courtroom, completely unaware that she was stepping directly into a trap of her own making. To understand how I ended up on that courthouse bench, you have to understand where I started. I wasn't born with a silver spoon in my mouth. Everything I had, every single brick of my business, was earned through sweat, calluses, and sleepless nights. When I was 22, my grandfather, Miller Sr., passed away. He didn't leave behind a massive fortune or a glittering estate. He left me 3 things: a heavily dented, pre-owned diesel truck, a small warehouse with a leaky roof on the edge of town, and a piece of advice I would never forget. "Arthur, people will always need things moved from point A to point B. If you are honest, if you are punctual, and if you treat your drivers like family, the business will take care of you." And so, Miller Logistics was born. In the early days, I was the CEO, the secretary, the mechanic, and the driver all at once. I lived on black coffee and cheap sandwiches. I slept in the back of that diesel truck more times than I could count, waiting at loading docks at 3 in the morning just to ensure our first few clients got their deliveries on time. Slowly, the 1 truck became 3. The 3 became 10. By the time I turned 30, Miller Logistics was a respected, mid-sized regional transport company with 35 drivers on the payroll and a reputation for absolute reliability. I bought back the land my grandfather had to sell during the recession. I built a beautiful, modern home on a hill overlooking the valley. I felt like I had finally achieved the American dream. The only thing missing was someone to share it with. That was when I met Clara. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon at a local charity gala I had been invited to. She was working as a junior marketing consultant for a firm that was handling the event's public relations. She was vibrant, intelligent, and possessed a radiant energy that immediately drew me in. When I spoke about my trucks and my drivers, she listened with what seemed like genuine fascination. She didn't look down on the fact that I still wore work boots and got grease under my fingernails. "I love that you built this with your own 2 hands, Arthur," she told me on our 3rd date, looking across the candlelit table with wide, admiring eyes. "In a world full of people chasing fake wealth, you are real. That is so incredibly rare." I fell hard, and I fell fast. Within a year, we were married in a beautiful ceremony on the grounds of our new home. I wanted to give her the world. Because my business was finally thriving, I told her she didn't need to work the grueling 60-hour weeks at her marketing firm anymore if she didn't want to. "Are you sure?" she had asked, her voice soft and hesitant. "I don't ever want to feel like a burden to you, Arthur." "You could never be a burden," I told her, kissing her forehead. "My success is your success now. We are a team." That was the first structural mistake I made. I opened the doors to my kingdom and handed her the keys without realizing that some people don't want to build a life with you. They simply want to occupy the castle you already built. 3. The shadow in the mirror. The conflict emerges. For the first 3 years, our marriage felt like a sanctuary. I expanded the business, securing a massive contract with a major agricultural distributor in the state. Clara handled the interior design of our home, transforming it into something out of an architectural magazine. She began mixing with a new social circle: wealthy local elites, country club members, and boutique owners. Slowly, imperceptibly, the woman I married began to change. It started with small things. The admiring looks she used to give my work boots turned into subtle grimaces when I walked through the mud in the driveway. She suggested I stop going to the warehouse altogether and hire a general manager to run the day-to-day operations. "Arthur, you're the owner now," she said one evening while swirling a glass of expensive wine. "You shouldn't be smelling like diesel fuel at dinner parties. People look at you, and they see a truck driver, not a corporate executive. It's bad for our image." "Our image?" I asked, mildly amused but slightly hurt. "Clara, that diesel fuel paid for this wine. It paid for this house. My drivers respect me because they know I've done the work they do." She rolled her eyes and muttered something under her breath about my small-town mentality. As the months rolled on, her spending habits escalated dramatically. High-end designer bags, weekend spa trips to Aspen with her country club friends, and expensive jewelry began appearing on our joint credit card statements. Whenever I tried to bring up a budget, she would immediately become defensive and turn the tables on me. "Oh, so now we're counting pennies?" she would snap, her voice rising. "I gave up my career to support you, Arthur. I spend my days managing this house and making sure you look presentable to the community, and you're going to lecture me over a handbag? Don't be so controlling." Because I loved her and hated conflict, I backed down. I told myself it was just a phase, that she was just adapting to a higher standard of living. But then, the emotional distance grew into a chasm. She started locking her phone when she walked out of the room. She would stay out late for marketing networking dinners, even though she had no active clients. When she was home, she was like a ghost, present in body, but completely absent in spirit. One night, around 11 p.m., I went down to the kitchen to get a glass of water. I saw the light on in our home office. Pushing the door open slightly, I saw Clara sitting at my desk. She had a stack of files open in front of her, the corporate tax returns and asset evaluations for Miller Logistics. She was typing furiously on her laptop, speaking on a hands-free earpiece in a low, intense whisper. "No, I have the 2024 valuation right here," she was saying to whoever was on the other end of the line. "If we appraise the fleet at current market value and factor in the outstanding debt on the new warehouse, we can maximize the liquid payout. Arthur doesn't look at these files closely anyway. He trusts his accountant blindly." My blood ran cold. I stood frozen in the hallway, the glass of water heavy in my hand. What was she doing? Who was she talking to? Before I could think, my boot creaked against the hardwood floor. Clara instantly snapped her laptop shut and whirled around, her face pale in the dim light of the desk lamp. "Arthur!" she gasped, her hand flying to her chest. "You scared me. What are you doing up?" I walked into the office, my eyes fixing on the folder marked Miller Logistics Holdings. "I could ask you the same thing, Clara. Why are you looking through the company financial evaluations at midnight? And who were you talking to about liquidating my fleet?" For a fraction of a second, absolute panic flashed across her features. But Clara was an expert performer. Within an instant, the panic smoothed out into a mask of cold, righteous irritation. She stood up, crossing her arms. "I was talking to a consultant friend of mine, if you must know," she said smoothly, her voice dripping with artificial confidence. "I've been thinking about re-entering the workforce and launching my own luxury lifestyle brand. I was looking at our personal assets to see if we could secure a business loan against the logistics company. I didn't want to bother you with it until I had a solid plan." "Secure a loan against my grandfather's business? Without asking me?" I stepped closer to the desk. "Clara, you just said into the phone that I trust my accountant blindly and that we could maximize a liquid payout. That doesn't sound like a loan application. That sounds like an exit strategy." She let out a harsh, dry laugh. "An exit strategy? Are you seriously accusing me of something right now? Arthur, look at yourself. You're paranoid. This is exactly why I didn't want to tell you. You treat that truck company like it's a holy relic. You're completely small-minded." "I treat it with respect because 35 families depend on it for their mortgages," I retorted, my voice finally cracking with the anger I had bottled up for months. "I built this business from nothing. I don't appreciate my wife looking through my corporate books in the dark like a thief." The word thief hit her like a physical slap. Her expression shifted from defensive to venomous. The beautiful, polished mask she wore in public completely dissolved, revealing a cold, calculating stranger underneath. "A thief?" she whispered, her eyes narrowing into dangerous slits. "Let me remind you something, Arthur. In this state, we are in a joint property jurisdiction. Everything you built during our marriage belongs to me just as much as it belongs to you. Every truck, every contract, every square inch of this property. I have spent years playing the doting housewife to a glorified mechanic. If I want to look at my own financial security, I have every right to do so." She slammed her laptop into her designer bag, grabbed the files, and pushed past me, shoulder-checking me hard as she left the room. That night, she slept in the guest bedroom. And I sat in the dark office, staring at the empty space on the desk where my family's legacy had just been scrutinized like a piece of meat at a butcher shop. The veil had been torn completely. I knew right then that my marriage wasn't just failing, it was a battlefield. But I still had no idea how far she had already gone down the path of betrayal. 2 weeks later, the hammer dropped. I arrived at the Miller Logistics main office on a crisp morning to find my head accountant, Marcus, sitting at his desk with his head in his hands. Marcus had been with me since the beginning. He was a loyal, quiet man who could track a missing penny across 10 different bank accounts. "Arthur," he said, his voice trembling as I walked in, "we have a massive problem. I've been locked out of our primary operating account, and that's not the worst of it." "What do you mean locked out?" I asked, setting down my coffee. "Did the bank have a security breach?" "No," Marcus said, looking up at me with eyes full of genuine dread. "The bank didn't breach us. Your wife did. She came in yesterday afternoon while you were out inspecting the new depot in the northern sector. She brought a signed corporate resolution giving her full executive signing authority over our secondary financial holdings. She transferred $400,000 out of our reserve maintenance fund into a private account registered in her name only." The room felt like it was spinning. 400,000? Marcus, that's our safety net. That's the money we use for quarterly fuel contracts and payroll insurance. How could the bank allow that? "She had the paperwork, Arthur," Marcus explained, his hands shaking as he handed me a printout. "When you adjusted the corporate structure last year to save on taxes, you listed her as an executive secretary on the board of directors. It was supposed to be a formality for tax benefits, but she used that title to claim equal administrative control." Before I could even process the financial hit, my phone rang. It was a process server. Less than an hour later, a man in a plain gray suit walked into our office and handed me a thick manila envelope. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Clara wasn't just leaving me. She was launching a scorched earth campaign. Attached to the divorce petition was an emergency motion for a restraining order that frozen all my personal bank accounts, a demand for immediate temporary alimony of $12,000 a month, and an explicit claim for 70% ownership of Miller Logistics, citing emotional distress and extreme career sacrifice to support the husband's enterprise. I called Clara immediately. My heart was pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. She answered on the fourth ring. She was at a high-end restaurant. I could hear the clinking of champagne glasses and soft jazz music in the background. "Clara, what is this?" I demanded, my voice raw. "You emptied the company reserve fund? You filed for a freeze on my accounts? Are you trying to destroy the business?" "Hello, Arthur," she said, her tone completely calm, cool, and detached. "I told you it didn't have to be this hard. My lawyer advised me that since you control the primary revenue of the household, I needed to protect my financial interests before you tried to hide assets from me. The $400,000 is just a retainer for my legal defense and living expenses." "Living expenses? You took our driver's payroll insurance, Clara. People could lose their jobs because of this." "Then I suggest you settle this quickly," she replied smoothly. "My terms are very simple. Give me the house, give me 60% of the logistics company's ongoing shares, and we can avoid a messy public trial. If you fight me, Arthur, I will ruin your reputation in this town. I'll make sure every client knows you're an abusive, financially controlling monster who kept his wife locked away in a gilded cage. You won't have a single contract left by the time I'm done." "I never abused you, Clara. I gave you everything," I shouted into the phone. "In a court of law, Arthur, the truth is whatever the best lawyer can make the judge believe," she said coldly. "And my lawyer is very, very expensive. Have a nice day." The line went dead. I stared at the phone, a cold, heavy realization settling deep into my bones. The woman I had loved, the woman I had shared my bed with for 7 years, was entirely gone. In her place was an apex predator who wanted to consume everything I had worked for. For the first 48 hours, I wanted to panic. I wanted to storm over to her country club, scream at her, and demand my grandfather's legacy back. But as I sat in my empty living room, Clara had already cleared out her jewelry and clothes. I remembered my grandfather's words again. "When a storm hits your truck on a slick road, Arthur, you don't slam on the brakes in a panic. You steer into the slide, keep your eyes on the horizon, and wait for your tires to grip the earth." I wasn't going to slam on the brakes. I was going to steer into the slide. The next morning, I bypassed all the prominent corporate attorneys in the city center. Clara had already consulted with most of them anyway, intentionally creating a conflict of interest so I couldn't hire them. Instead, I drove down to the old industrial district and walked into a small, unassuming brownstone building. On the door was a simple brass plaque: Evelyn Vance, Family Law and Forensic Litigation. Evelyn was a sharp woman in her late 50s with silver hair, piercing gray eyes, and a no-nonsense attitude. She didn't look like Clara's slick, media-friendly lawyer, Mr. Vance, who ironically shared her last name but was no relation. Evelyn looked like a woman who chewed through corporate lies for breakfast. I laid out the entire case on her desk: the corporate structure, the $400,000 transfer, the frozen accounts, and Clara's threats. Evelyn reviewed the document silently for nearly an hour, tapping a silver pen against her cheek. Finally, she looked up, a sharp, dangerous smile playing on her lips. "Your wife is arrogant, Mr. Miller," Evelyn said, leaning back in her chair. "Arrogant people make brilliant openings, but they leave terrible rears exposed. She thinks because she has the city's flashiest lawyer, she can bully a quiet working man into total submission. But she made one critical mistake." "What's that?" I asked. "She moved that $400,000 before filing the divorce petition, claiming it was for living expenses and legal retainers. However, under state financial tracking laws, moving corporate operational capital out of an active logistics firm right before a legal filing can be classified as an intentional dissipation of marital assets and corporate fraud if she used external leverage to get it." Evelyn leaned forward, her eyes locking onto mine. "We aren't going to fight her in the newspapers, Arthur. We aren't going to yell at her deposition. We are going to let her think she is winning. We will comply with her basic requests, give her minimal resistance, and let her build a giant mountain of lies under oath. And while she's busy lying, I'm going to hire a private forensic accountant to trace every single dollar she spent over the last 2 years. Every dinner, every text message she sent from that corporate laptop, every single hidden account. Can you find where she put the money? Oh, we'll find it, Evelyn said coldly. But more importantly, we're going to look into who she was talking to on that laptop at midnight. People don't liquidate a logistics firm alone, Arthur. She has help, and whoever is helping her is likely leaving a digital footprint. For the next 6 months, I lived like a monk. I moved into a small apartment near the warehouse. I ran the business on a shoestring budget, taking out a high-interest personal loan just to ensure my driver's payroll went through on time every Friday. My drivers knew what was happening. They saw the stress lines on my face. One afternoon, my senior driver, Big Mike, walked into my office and slammed a thick envelope of cash onto my desk. "What's this, Mike?" I asked, startled. "The guys pulled some cash together from our bonuses, boss," Mike said, his voice gruff but sincere. "We know that snake is trying to drain you dry. We don't want you losing this place. Use this to pay the fuel bills. We got your back, Arthur. Just promise us you'll knock her off that high horse when the time comes." I felt tears prick the corners of my eyes. I shook Mike's massive hand. "I promise you, Mike, every single penny will be returned, and she won't know what hit her." While Clara was living in a luxury penthouse rental downtown, posting photos on social media of her new independent journey and attending charity balls, Evelyn and her team were quietly pulling on a single loose thread in Clara's financial tapestry. And 3 weeks before our final trial date, that thread unraveled into something far bigger, dirtier, and more shocking than I could have ever imagined. It turned out that Clara's consultant friend, the one she was talking to at midnight on my corporate laptop, wasn't just an independent advisor. His name was Julian Vance. He was the nephew of her hotshot divorce attorney, and more importantly, he was a senior vice president at Apex Transport, our primary corporate competitor in the region. Apex Transport had been trying to buy out Miller Logistics for 5 years. My grandfather had refused them, and I had refused them 3 separate times. We had the better routes, the more loyal drivers, and the premium contract with the regional agricultural distributor. Apex wanted us dead so they could monopolize the entire tri-state transport corridor. When Evelyn handed me the forensic financial report, my hands shook with absolute fury. Clara hadn't just decided to divorce me because she fell out of love. She had been bought. 16 months ago, long before our marriage showed any outward signs of decay, Clara had opened a secret offshore bank account in the Cayman Islands under a shell company named CV Marketing Holdings. Deposited into that account were 3 separate payments of $50,000 each, all originating from a corporate account controlled by Apex Transport. The deal was sickeningly simple. Clara was using her position as an executive secretary at Miller Logistics to copy our client lists, our proprietary route optimization data, and our internal pricing matrices. She was feeding this data directly to Julian Vance at Apex so they could underbid our contracts. And the ultimate goal of her aggressive divorce strategy? She didn't want 60% of my company to run it. She had an active, unsigned contract to sell her court-awarded shares directly to Apex Transport the moment the judge signed the final decree. They were going to use the divorce court as a legal execution squad to kill Miller Logistics from the inside out. "This is corporate espionage, Arthur," Evelyn explained, her face deadly serious as we sat in her office surrounded by binders of evidence. "It goes far beyond a standard divorce dispute. She has actively conspired with a competitor to diminish the value of your marital property while receiving covert compensation." "Can we go to the police?" I asked, my chest tight. "We could," Evelyn said thoughtfully. "But if we file criminal charges now, Apex's legal team will jump in, delay the divorce proceedings for years, freeze your company indefinitely during the investigation, and you'll go bankrupt before you ever see justice. No, we don't say a word to the police yet. We don't say a word to Clara. We let her walk into that final hearing. We let her sit on that witness stand, under oath, and swear to the judge that she has disclosed all assets and that she only wants equity because she loves the business." Evelyn slid a final piece of paper across the desk. It was a transcript of a text message exchange recovered from Clara's old corporate laptop cache, sent just 48 hours prior to our trial date. Julian, Apex. Is everything ready for Thursday? My uncle says Judge Thomas is old school and usually awards the wife at least 50% of corporate holdings if there's any hint of marital neglect. Clara. It's perfect. Arthur has no idea. He's turning up with a public attorney who looks like she buys her suits at a thrift store. I'll cry on the stand, tell the judge he forced me out of the company operations, and we'll have the signing rights by Friday afternoon. Make sure my final payout of $1. $5 million is ready for transfer the second the decree is stamped. Julian, Apex. You're a genius, Clara. See you at the celebration dinner. I stared at the text messages. The final piece of the puzzle had clicked into place. I didn't feel sadness anymore. I didn't feel the sting of betrayal. The love I had for her had been completely burned away, leaving nothing but the cold, hardened steel of a man who was ready for war. Evelyn, I said, looking up at my attorney. Let's make sure she gets exactly what she deserves. And that brought us back to the present day. Pushing through the heavy oak doors of courtroom 4B, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The room was brightly lit, with high ceilings and wood panels that made every footstep sound like a gunshot. Judge Catherine Thomas sat high above the room on her judicial bench. She was a stern, elegant woman with sharp eyes behind reading glasses, her silver hair pulled back into a tight bun. She had a reputation for being entirely no-nonsense, a judge who valued cold, hard facts above emotional theatricality. Clara and her attorney, Mr. Vance, took their seats at the petitioner's table on the right. Clara sat gracefully, placing her designer bag neatly on the floor. She gave the judge a soft, modest smile, the picture of a wronged, dignified woman seeking simple justice. Evelyn and I took our seats at the respondent's table on the left. Compared to Mr. Vance's sleek, gold-monogrammed leather briefcases, Evelyn's worn, overstuffed canvas bags looked almost comical. I saw Mr. Vance look over at us, a smirk flickering across his face, before he turned to whisper reassurance to Clara. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Catherine Thomas," the bailiff chanted. We stood, then sat as the judge adjusted her robes and opened the case file in front of her. "We are here today for the final property distribution and resolution in the matter of Clara Miller versus Arthur Miller," Judge Thomas announced, her voice echoing clearly through the courtroom microphone. "The core assets in dispute are the residential property at 414 Ridgeview Lane and the corporate entity known as Miller Logistics. Petitioner is claiming a 70% equity stake in both. Respondent is contesting. Let's begin with the petitioner's opening statement." Mr. Vance stood up, buttoning his sleek suit jacket. He walked to the center of the room with the easy confidence of a man who had won 100 cases before breakfast. "Thank you, Your Honor," Mr. Vance began, his voice deep and dramatic. "This is a tragic case of a dedicated, supportive wife who sacrificed her own burgeoning marketing career to help her husband build a regional transport empire. For 7 years, Clara Miller was the silent force behind Miller Logistics. She managed the corporate social image, handled administrative functions, and provided the emotional stability that allowed Mr. Miller to thrive." He paused, turning to look at me with an expression of profound disapproval. "But how was she rewarded, Your Honor? When the business achieved massive profitability, Mr. Miller began systematically pushing her out. He cut off her access to operational decisions, treated her like an expensive decoration, and subjected her to what can only be described as financial isolation. He kept her blind to the true value of the company they built together. We are asking for 70% of the company and the home not out of greed, Your Honor, but as a fair, necessary rectification for a woman who poured her life into a business that now seeks to discard her with nothing." Clara brought a delicate lace handkerchief to her eyes, dabbing away a non-existent tear. She looked down, her shoulders trembling slightly. It was a masterful performance. I saw Judge Thomas making a few notes, her expression unreadable. "Thank you, Mr. Vance," the judge said. "Ms. Vance, your opening statement for the respondent." Evelyn stood up calmly. She didn't walk to the center of the room. She stood right next to me, her voice quiet, but remarkably steady. "Your Honor, the history of Miller Logistics is written in the tax records. the bank loans, and the sweat of Arthur Miller and his 35 drivers. We will prove today that Mrs. Miller did not sacrifice her career. She voluntarily resigned to live a life of extreme luxury funded entirely by her husband's labor. Furthermore, we will show that far from being financially isolated, Mrs. Miller possessed enough administrative control to secretly drain $400,000 of operational safety funds from the company just days before filing this petition. We contest any distribution of corporate equity to the petitioner. Mr. Vance let out a loud, dramatic sigh from his table. Your Honor, we have already addressed that fund transfer in our motion. It was a necessary protective measure by a spouse who was about to be abandoned without financial resources. We will let the evidence speak to that, Mr. Vance. Judge Thomas cut him off sharply, her eyes flashing behind her glasses. Call your first witness. Mr. Vance immediately called Clara to the stand. She walked up to the witness box with perfect poise, placed her hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. For the next 45 minutes, Mr. Vance guided her through a carefully rehearsed narrative. Clara spoke softly, her voice full of emotional tremors, as she described how hard she had worked to support me. I just wanted us to be a team, Your Honor, Clara said, looking directly up at Judge Thomas. I loved Miller Logistics. I still love it. I wanted to help expand it into new markets. I spent hours analyzing marketing strategies for our routes. But Arthur became so protective, so possessive. He didn't want me to have any say. When I realized he was hiding financial documents from me, I panicked. That's why I moved the $400,000. I was terrified he would leave me with nothing. I wanted to save the business from his poor management, but he completely shut me out. Thank you, Mrs. Miller, Mr. Vance said smoothly, walking back to his desk. Your witness, Ms. Vance. Evelyn stood up, picking up a thin, yellow legal pad. She walked over to the witness stand, looking at Clara with a calm, almost pleasant expression. Mrs. Miller, Evelyn began, her voice soft. You just testified that you love Miller Logistics and that your sole intention in seeking a 60% equity stake is to help manage and grow the business into new markets. Is that correct? Yes, Clara said firmly, her voice regaining its confidence. I care deeply about the company's future and the stability of our operations. And you swear under penalty of perjury that you have never engaged in any actions intended to diminish, damage, or devalue Miller Logistics for your own personal gain? Of course not. Clara looked offended, glancing up at the judge. I would never do that. I helped build it. Excellent. Evelyn turned a page on her legal pad. Let's talk about your independent marketing company, CV Marketing Holdings. You registered this entity in the Cayman Islands approximately 16 months ago, correct? Clara's face went instantly rigid. The faint pink blush on her cheeks drained away, leaving her skin looking like chalk. She cleared her throat, her eyes darting quickly over to her attorney. I registered a consulting entity, yes, Clara stammered, her voice dropping an octave. It was for my future business plans. I didn't think it was relevant to these proceedings since it has no active revenue. No active revenue? Evelyn raised her eyebrows. That's interesting, because according to the subpoenaed bank records from the Cayman Island Monetary Authority, CV Marketing Holdings received 3 separate wire transfers of $50,000 each last year. Do you know who sent that money, Mrs. Miller? Mr. Vance slammed his hand on the table, standing up. Objection, Your Honor. Relevance. This is a family court asset division, not a corporate tax hearing. My client's independent future business attempts have nothing to do with her marital right to her husband's logistics firm. Your Honor, Evelyn turned to the bench, her voice dropping into a deadly serious register. This is completely relevant. We are about to show that the petitioner has actively engaged in fraudulent concealment of assets and corporate espionage against the very marital property she is claiming equity in. Judge Thomas leaned forward, her sharp gaze fixing entirely on Clara, who was now visibly trembling in the witness box. Objection overruled, Judge Thomas stated coldly. The witness will answer the question. Who funded that offshore account, Mrs. Miller? Clara swallowed hard, her knuckles turning white as she gripped the edge of the wooden witness box. I don't recall the specific corporate name. It was an independent logistics consulting contract. Let me refresh your memory then, Evelyn said, her voice cutting through the silent courtroom like a razor. The funds were wired directly from Apex Transport Corporation, the single largest direct competitor to your husband's business in this state. A collective gasp echoed from the few spectators in the back of the room. Mr. Vance looked down at his desk, his face suddenly turning a dark shade of crimson. He began frantically shuffling through his papers, completely blindsided. He didn't know. Clara hadn't even told her own expensive lawyer the truth. Now, Mrs. Miller, Evelyn continued, stepping closer to the stand, her voice growing more commanding with every second. Why would a direct competitor pay you $150,000 into a secret offshore account while you were working as an executive secretary at your husband's firm? Could it be because you were feeding them proprietary client list data, route matrices, and internal pricing structures? No, that's a lie! Clara screamed, her polished composure completely evaporating. She looked up at the judge, her eyes wide with panic. Your Honor, she is making things up. I never did that. My husband is just using his money to construct fake financial reports to ruin me. You never did that? Evelyn smiled. It was the smile of a trap snapping shut. Your Honor, at this time, the defense requests permission to introduce Exhibit G. It is a certified digital forensic log recovered from the cache of the corporate laptop used exclusively by Mrs. Miller at the marital residence. Permission granted, Judge Thomas said, her eyes locked onto Clara. Evelyn walked over to the bailiff, handed him a printed document, and then walked back to the center of the room. A tech technician clicked a button, and a large flat-screen monitor mounted on the courtroom wall flickered to life. On the screen was a blown-up, high-definition image of a text message thread. The date stamp was from just 2 days ago. The entire courtroom fell into a deathly, suffocating silence as Judge Thomas read the words displayed on the screen out loud. Clara, it's perfect. Arthur has no idea. He's turning up with a public attorney who looks like she buys her suits at a thrift store. I'll cry on the stand, tell the judge he forced me out of the company operations, and we'll have the signing rights by Friday afternoon. Make sure my final payout of $1.5 million is ready for transfer the second the decree is stamped. Julian, Apex. You're a genius, Clara. See you at the celebration dinner. The words hung in the air like a heavy fog. Clara stared at the screen, her mouth completely open, her eyes bulging out of her head in absolute paralyzed horror. She looked like she had just seen a ghost. The lace handkerchief slipped from her fingers, fluttering down to the floor unnoticed. Mr. Vance slowly put his pen down on his desk, closed his leather folder, and pulled his chair back slightly, completely distancing himself from his client. He knew the case was over. Mrs. Miller, Judge Thomas said, her voice dangerously quiet, vibrating with absolute judicial rage. Is that your phone number listed at the top of that text transmission log? Clara couldn't speak. Her throat clicked as she tried to swallow. She looked over at me, her eyes begging, looking for a shred of the soft, compliant husband she had bullied for years, but she found nothing but a stone wall. Your Honor, I can explain, Clara whispered, her voice cracking into a high-pitched squeak. It was taken out of context. Julian we were just joking. Joking about committing fraud against this court, Mrs. Miller? Judge Thomas interrupted, her voice slamming down like a sledgehammer. Joking about executing an illegal corporate asset transfer under the guise of an equity distribution petition? Joking about lying under oath to my face less than 10 minutes ago? The judge stood up, her robe billowing out around her. She looked down at Clara with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. Step down from the stand, Mrs. Miller, immediately. Clara stumbled out of the witness box, her legs looking like jelly. She almost tripped over her own designer bag as she collapsed back into her chair at the petitioner's table. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with real tears this time, tears of absolute exposure and defeat. Judge Thomas didn't even retire to her chambers to deliberate. She remained standing behind her bench, looking down at the courtroom with immense authority. This court has seen many cases of marital discord, greed, and bitterness, Judge Thomas began, her voice ringing clearly through the room. But rarely have I witnessed an act of such calculated, malicious treachery and bad faith litigation as I have seen here today. The petitioner, Clara Miller, entered this courtroom pretending to be a wronged, marginalized spouse seeking equitable justice. In reality, she is a corporate saboteur who attempted to use the legal mechanism of divorce to steal her husband's family legacy and sell it to a competitor for personal profit. The judge hammered her gavel once, the loud crack echoing like a gunshot. The court orders as follows. The petitioner's request for a 70% stake in Miller Logistics and the residential property is denied in its entirety. Furthermore, due to the extreme documented dissipation of marital assets and corporate fraud, the court awards 100% ownership of Miller Logistics and the residence at 414 Ridgeview Lane exclusively to the respondent, Arthur Miller. Clara let out a loud, strangled gasp from her table, her head snapping up. "Your Honor, please. I have nowhere to go. My accounts are frozen." "Silence, Mrs. Miller," Judge Thomas snapped. "You will receive zero alimony from this day forward. Additionally, you are ordered to immediately return the $400,000 you unlawfully transferred from the Miller Logistics Reserve Fund. If those funds are not returned to the corporate account within 48 hours, a bench warrant will be issued for your immediate arrest." The judge turned her eyes to Evelyn and me, her expression softening into a look of profound respect. "Mr. Miller, you built your business honestly. This court will not allow it to be dismantled by greed. Furthermore, I am forwarding this digital forensic transcript and the Cayman Island banking logs directly to the State Attorney General's office for an immediate criminal investigation into corporate espionage and perjury." The gavel came down a final time. Crack. "Court is adjourned." The room instantly erupted into a flurry of movement. Mr. Vance didn't even look at Clara. He grabbed his sleek leather bags, muttered a hasty, "Good luck, Clara," and practically ran out of the courtroom doors, eager to distance his firm from a criminal perjury scandal. Clara sat entirely alone at the long table. The blue-tailored suit that made her look like a conquering corporate titan an hour ago now looked like a costume that was 3 sizes too big for her. She looked small, shattered, and utterly bankrupt. I stood up, buttoning my plain jacket. I looked down at her one last time. There was no anger left in me, no hatred, just a profound sense of relief. She looked up at me through smudged mascara, her voice trembling. "Arthur, please. You loved me once. You can't leave me like this. I have nothing left. Apex won't pay me a single dollar now. I'm going to lose everything." "You didn't lose it, Clara," I said quietly, my voice calm and steady. "You sold it. You just miscalculated the price." I turned my back on her, picked up Evelyn's worn canvas bags, and walked down the center aisle of the courtroom. When I pushed through the heavy oak doors into the warm afternoon sunlight, I felt the weight of the last 6 months drop off my shoulders completely. 2 days later, the $400,000 was wired back into the Miller Logistics primary operational account. Clara had to liquidate her entire luxury lifestyle fund, her designer bags, and her jewelry just to meet the judge's 48-hour deadline to avoid jail time. According to the local news reports, Julian Vance was fired from Apex Transport by the end of the week, and both he and Clara are currently facing an active grand jury investigation for corporate fraud and perjury. On Friday afternoon, I drove my old grandfather's diesel truck back into the main depot of Miller Logistics. The sun was setting over the valley, casting a beautiful golden light across the long row of 35 transport trucks parked neatly in the yard. As I stepped down from the cab, Big Mike and the rest of the drivers were waiting for me outside the break room. They didn't say anything at first. They just looked at me, seeing the calm, unburdened smile on my face. Big Mike stepped forward, a massive grin breaking across his weathered face. He raised a thermos of coffee in the air. "Welcome back to your company, boss," Mike shouted. The entire yard erupted into cheers, the drivers clapping and honking the horns of their trucks. The sound was deafening, a beautiful, thunderous roar that shook the very earth under my feet. I stood there, shaking their hands, laughing, and feeling a deep, profound warmth in my chest. That evening, as I sat alone on the back porch of my home overlooking the valley, I looked down at my old work boots, still covered in a light layer of dust from the yard. I realized then that life has a beautiful, natural way of balancing the scales. True wealth isn't something you can steal through a clever lawsuit, a high-priced attorney, or a secret offshore account. True wealth is built in the things that greed can never understand. It's built in the calluses on your hands, the loyalty of the people who stand by you when the storm hits, and the absolute, unshakable power of a quiet truth. Clara tried to use the darkness of betrayal to tear down my legacy, but in the end, she only succeeded in building her own prison. And as I watched the stars appear over the quiet valley, I knew that Miller Logistics wouldn't just survive, it would thrive for generations to come. Because it was built on solid ground, and the ground always outlasts the storm.